For this project, I want to look at the ice rink example file. So browse to your project files and let's open that up. This is just a sample drawing of a very generic ice hockey rink. Now, sometimes in AutoCAD, you need your objects to be a bit faded. That way you can show them a bit more softly or show objects that are behind them. That's where the transparency setting can help you out. Now, the transparency setting can be controlled by layer or by object. It works like setting an object's color or line type. So open up our layer manager, type in LA, and we see here something I'm going to want to make transparent, and that is the ice rink hatch. So this layer has the hatch pattern right here for our ice rink. See, it's ice rink hatch pattern. Now, I want to fade that back just a little bit so it's not as prevalent. And you can do that in one of two ways. The best way is to manage it through your layer manager. Now, this is the transparency setting. It starts at 0 and will go all the way up to 90. Now think of the numbers as the amount of transparency it has. So if its transparency is set at 0, that means there is 0 transparency. That means it's not transparent whatsoever. Now, if it was 100, that means you wouldn't see it at all. They give us the settings in 10% increments. So we can set 10%, only a little bit of transparency. We go all the way down to 90%, which is a lot of transparency. A lot of times I find that the 50% or 40% works quite well. So I'm going to set it at 90%. Click OK. So you can see here, the hatch is still on. I can barely see it at all. So let's go back and let's change this to a 50% transparency. Click OK. And you can see it's come back. Now you really get to see this type of benefit from the transparency setting when you have a lot of different lines behind it, whatever that color may be. So if we change this color to something a little bit more prevalent, like red, if I change this one also to red, I'm going to override the transparency on this hatch pattern because I can do that per object, though I recommend you don't. You can change it right here, and I'm going to set it to 0 to have no transparency. This red object and this red object are very different. This is much brighter. So when we go to print, the red is going to be a solid color and this is going to be faded back. So I'm going to do a little plot here. I'm going to show you a print preview of what it's going to look like. When you go to print, you have to make sure you have the plot transparency setting on. Otherwise, it won't apply any transparency whatsoever. So that's something you need to be mindful of. You can turn this on all the time. That way you'll always have transparency in case someone has set that in your file. So if I look at the preview, you can see this line work is faded back quite a bit. So there's a big difference. So the transparency setting works great if you have a lot of different hatches you have to do, but they're very solid and it covers up a lot of their line work. You may want to fade that back a little bit. I suggest you start off by looking between 40, 50, and 60% of your fading for your transparency. And go from there and see what works best in that specific situation. But it's a great way to have an area shaded as a background to highlight it, but then perhaps you can have the line work still come through. So keep that in mind as a way to hatch or to better visualize your line work.